видеть тему сегодняшнего моего выступления. Она называется «Почему белорусам хорошо?». И именно не хорошо, а хорошо, потому что мне кажется, что хорошо добавляет каких-то дополнительных смыслов вот в эту нашу белорусскость. Да. И, возможно, в течение презентации вы как бы поймете, почему белорусам хорошо, вот, потому что все не так, как мы могли бы думать, например. Так что как-то так, как-то так. Что? Да, хорошо. Давайте пока показываю следующий слайд, я вам расскажу чуть-чуть о нашей методологии. Да, всего у нас был 1001 респондент, да, и мы опрашивали жителей белорусских городов возрастом от 18 до 64 лет, взвешенно по полу, возрасту и региону. Вот, следующий слайд будет о том, я хотел бы задать каждому вопрос. Как вам кажется, в нашей белорусской ситуации чем хуже, тем лучше, или чем лучше, тем хуже? Как бы известная фраза. Но вот пока начнем смотреть так. Вот как вы видите, мы ведем наши опросы, да, опрашиваем наших респондентов уже с декабря, да, что касается индекса потребительской уверенности. И вот в декабре 2021 года ВВП вырос за год на 2,3%. Да? А доля белорусов, которые оценивали состояние экономики как плохое, либо очень плохое, составляла 57%. Вот. И, как бы, учитывая большой рост, было столько негативных ответов. Что произошло в апреле? В апреле, да, был рост ВВП от месяца, месяц к месяцу, от января до апреля, составлял минус 2% к предыдущему году, а доля белорусов, которые оценивали состояние экономики как плохое или очень плохое, снизилась до 53,5%. То есть в экономике стало хуже, да, но белорусы стали ее оценивать более позитивно, ну, как минимум, менее негативно, да, потому что доля негативных ответов уменьшилась. Это был апрель. Вот. И это была горячая фаза войны. Все, мне кажется, думали, вступит ли Беларусь, не вступит ли Беларусь, что делать дальше. Что же произошло в августе? Это тема нашего сегодняшнего выступления. В августе от января к июлю этого года, к прошлому году ВВП упал на около минус 5%, да, в соответствии с Белстатом. А доля ответов, которые оценивали состояние белорусской экономики как плохое или очень плохое, составляла уже 47,7%. То есть белорусы рассматривают ситуацию в экономике как довольно нормально. То есть санкции, война и все, что это происходит, а белорусам довольно хорошо. И это первый факт. Так, прошу дальше. Вот, в общем, такой первый замечательный главный факт, что пессимистов больше, как бы не большинство. Их всего лишь 47%. Вот. И тут такой был замечательный заголовок онлайнера, да, в Твиттере, как мне показалось, который говорит вообще все о нашей ситуации. Я его зачитаю. Лето почти все, через 2 дня уже осень, а там здравствуй, школа. Хотя жаловаться белорусам совершенно не на что. Прошедшие месяцы были как никогда теплыми и ласковыми к белорусам. Вот, прошу дальше. Немножко, да, расскажу вам о нашем индексе. Индекс потребительской уверенности, который мы замеряем уже 3-й раз, это составной индекс, состоящий на основе 5 вопросов. Да. 2 вопроса о состоянии белорусской экономики, 2 вопроса о состоянии вашего материального положения вашей семьи и 1 вопрос о благоприятности больших, серьезных покупок в этот момент. И мы делаем 2 индекса. Один по методологии Росстата, для того, чтобы сравнивать с Россией, как с крупнейшим торгово-политическим партнером Республики Беларусь. И 4 вопроса по методологии Евростата, да, чтобы сравнить с Европейским Союзом, с странами Европы. Ну и считается, что индекс Евростата, он более предиктивно способен прогнозировать будущее состояние экономики. Давайте пойдем дальше. Беларусь и Россия. Да, в 3-м квартале, то есть в августе 2022 года, индекс потребительской уверенности Беларуси по методологии Росстата составлял минус 23%. И по сравнению с апрелем вы можете видеть квартал 2 на этом графике. То есть произошло прямо значительное увеличение, да, больше 5%. В то же время во втором квартале, да, и по сравнению с первым кварталом в России, вы можете видеть огромное снижение почти от 20% до минус 31%. И это самое крупное с 2015 года, по-моему, в России снижение. Скоро будут данные по России, уже через 1,5 недели. Мы уже узнаем, что произошло у них. Возможно, у них тоже наблюдается какой-то большой рост наверх. Да. Но пока мы только видим, что у белорусов стало меньше пессимизма и стало все чуточку лучше. Вот дальше. Из этого следует второй простой факт, что потребительская уверенность белорусов чуть-чуть улучшается. Дальше я предлагаю сравнить Беларусь с Европейским Союзом. Да? И на этом в Беларуси индекс потребительской уверенности в соответствии с методологией Евростата составляет минус 18%. И на графике можно видеть, что только 3 страны Европы улучшили свой индекс по сравнению с апрелем 2022 года. Это Беларусь, Албания и Турция. Во всех других странах происходит дальнейшее снижение. Вы знаете все эти новости про войну, про вопросы с газом, все переживают за зиму. И в принципе, на людях, на многих европейцах это отражается. Но на белорусах, у белорусов все идет чуть-чуть наверх, чуть-чуть все нормально, более-менее. Данные Турции можно связать с тем, что у них уже последние годы довольно сложная ситуация с девальвациями, с инфляцией, и поэтому и война их как-то так особо, наверное, менее касается, поэтому у них все более позитивно. Но об этом можно подискутировать. И можно посмотреть, в принципе, что было в апреле, да, на нашем графике. Вы можете видеть направление стрелочки, все идет на снижение. Индекс во всех странах уменьшается. А в августе, да, это уже динамика стало чуть меньше, да, но все равно по большинству стран происходит снижение. А в Беларуси, как мы уже говорили, только 3 страны, все идет чуть-чуть наверх. И следует следующий факт, что из самых пессимистов, да, белорусы перебрались в одних из оптимистов Европы, да, в августе 2002 года. И это, мне кажется, занимательный результат. В принципе, белорусам довольно относительно, но хорошо. Так, в принципе, наш индекс состоит из 5 компонентов, как я уже вам сказал. Да? Я поэтому тут предлагаю очень быстро пробежаться. Первый компонент, да, он основан на вопросе, как вы считаете, экономическая ситуация в Беларуси по сравнению с тем, какой она была год назад. И, конечно, очень мало людей говорят, что что-то улучшилось, потому что они видят, что происходит вокруг, там растет инфляция, чуть-чуть уменьшаются их доходы. И поэтому только 8% в августе считало, что что-то несколько или намного улучшилась ситуация. И по-прежнему много негатива, очень много негатива. То есть 39 плюс 27%, больше 65% говорят, что ситуация ухудшилась. Окей, но уже это не так плохо, как, например, в декабре или апреле, чуть-чуть есть снижение. Давайте пойдем дальше и обсудим второй компонент. Да, и в принципе, если посчитать, это 8% versus 66% позитивных против негативных ответов. Так, второй компонент отвечает на вопрос об ожиданиях.
Second component is about expectations, how households feel the change in the economy of Belarus in a year. And as it often happens, I suggest you to switch the slide. So in principle, when people answer questions about the future, the majority of countries, unless those are in crisis, people believe that everything's going to be better, that they will be able to change something better in the country. And you can see, next slide, the ratio is 16% positive versus 39% negative answers. You see, people become more optimistic. People don't know how to answer the question, and they believe that the future will bring better things. Component 3. This is about family financial standing. It's the same situation for the last, compared to the last 12 months. And you can see that the ratio is 11% positive versus 51% negative answers. And the next component, you can see the figures, you understand the reasoning. So people have better expectations for the future, and the reality is gloomy. And we can see that in general, Belarusians are more optimistic. And fact number 4, that the sentiment of Belarus improves insignificantly. This can be seen in these 3 figures. Right now, we can see December 2021. So what do we have to look at? The blue line and the red line. We can see that the blue line is to the left. This and the blue line stands for the future sentiment, and the red line stands for the very index. So what people feel. And we can see that at that time, in December 21, the expectations were gloomy and grim because the future components were negative. Everybody believed that after New Year, bad things would happen. Then what happened in April? In April, this is next slide, in April of 2022, the situation changed. Bad things happened, just like Belarusians projected. But now their expectations, the future component gets higher, and we can see that bad things happened, and they thought maybe the war would be over or everything would suspend. And in August 2022, if we look at it, you can probably hardly see this, but in general, the consumer confidence index and its future component are the same. So the expectations, in fact, match the self-perception of people. So that's the main idea. This is the index. You can look at it in August. This is the future perspective component, and we can see clear populations. So I can see four main populations. The first one, like non-beaten optimists, people aged 18 through to 24, relatively young, not employed, hoping to get employed soon and to have more money, and they believe in the country. But we have to survey this population deeper. Second interesting group, which stands out, they are almost positive, close to zero. These are the citizens of Mogilev Oblast. We call them proud Mogilev citizens, and they are almost positive, like -2, -3%. And this is a spectacular increase if compared to December. So people from Mogilev believe that the situation will get better. What? There is a question from the audience about Mogilev Oblast, but the interpreter can hardly hear the person because the person doesn't have a microphone. Next, people who work in agricultural sector, they're called the optimistic agrarians. This is population 3, and population 4, the key victims, people who suffered from the political repression, IT sector employees, people who relocate to other countries, and certainly the finance sector. They are one of the main victims. And speaking of population 3, agrarians, when we say agrarians, we say that these are the people who work in the agricultural sector. This can be a small group, so the confidence intervals can be broad, but still. I beg your pardon. Those of you who do not have microphones, you are not heard by the interpreter. If you want to clarify anything, just give me a sign, okay? Let's continue. Or shall we? Okay, let's get back to the questions at the end. In general, the changes in the index. Changes in the index, we can see that if compared to April, the index has been improving in the main populations, like by age, gender, settlement type, we can see improvements. And the future, the component of the future of the country, we can see the improvements are among youth, Mogilov residents, agricultural workers. They believe that the future is going to be much better, and we can see significant improvements there. We are not going to dwell on this. You'll be able to study these presentations later. But in principle, many groups, and we've invented the so-called clusters, we call them privileged realists, privileged optimists, realists, and desperate optimists. So these are four groups. And in many of them, we can see transition from realist to optimists, or from desperate optimists who believed to the best. They moved to grounded beliefs in the future, and they feel better today. So we can see them once we scroll, and we get to fact 5. In some groups, there's a crazy change. Some populations, like agricultural workers, it was everything bad for them, and today they are the main optimists, as well as Mogilov citizens. Let's discuss income. 43% of Belarusians have declining income. But if we exclude the forex exchange rate and the inflation, this is 41% and 30%. 30% is without the forex rate change and without considering inflation. But in all groups, we can see lowering of the income drop. You can see the arrows. So we can see that less and less people have their incomes declining. Why they declined? You can see the last but one line at the bottom. The exchange rate of the Belarusian ruble changed to foreign currencies, and in August, as you remember, the forex rate will stabilize. Maybe macroeconomists will correct me if I'm wrong, but this has become one of the reasons for the income decline. It is also interesting that out of 43% who had lower incomes, we can see less people who, like 45% difference people, are less who save on food. It used to be about 40%, and today about 35% save on food, which is good. And we can see that the pace of declining incomes slows down. Speaking of employment, you can see that in August, 3 to 4% of Belarusians and urban population said that they lost job, and 80% said that their friends lost jobs. If compared to April and December, we can see some lowering of this figure. And the next fact 6, is as follows. That the share of Belarusians, or the share of the unemployed, is better than in pre-war years. And the latest thing, Andrei Petrovich, we discussed it with you, like media consumption. We're going to tell you how self-perception of Belarusians happens in the context of the Consumer Confidence Index, and we can see what are the sources of the news for the people. So 44% of respondents watch government TV. That's the main source of their information. What does that mean? We can see 3 bar charts. They answer the questions how watching state TV, government TV, is related to the perception of the economy. I should give you a disclaimer. We're not saying that it impacts, but we can see a linkage between those things, and then we have to investigate why this happens. So we can see, and there's the first question. What is your perception of the standing of the Belarusian economy today? Those who watch government TV, only 34% of them say that everything is bad or very bad in the economy. Those who do not watch government TV, they say that more than 55% of them say that the economy today feels bad or very bad today. So the difference, the gap is about 20%. You can see this gap. However, as concerns question 2 about the changing income, it's all the same. They have a similar perception of the income decline. Speaking of question 3 about the inflation in the last 12 months, there are lots of similarities between these two groups. We can see that Belarusians who do not watch government TV say that economy grew by more than 20%, and those people are by 8 to 9% more than those who watch government TV. But the inflation this year is going to be about 70%, so they overestimate inflation. Speaking of the frequency, okay, TV. So we decided to look at the distribution of answers to the questions about the economy today, how this depends on how frequently people watch government TV. What we can see, we had 182 respondents, about 20% of them said they watch the government news on TV daily, and 25% of them say that economy feels bad. Versus those who do not watch government TV, that's the lowest bar. We have 58% of the people who say the same. So people who watch TV, government TV, once and 2 to 3%, there are 37% of them who believe that the economy feels bad. This means the more people watch the news on government TV, the less negative perceptions they have. But this is unrealistic linkage. So the index, those who watch TV versus those who do not watch, you can see the figures minus 28, minus 16. This is about the index. Okay, the future of the country, those who watch TV believe that the future is bad in 5.2% of cases, and those who do not watch TV, 29% believe that it's going to be bad. And the current status, you can see the financial standing of families. You can see the difference. So, conclusion: those who do not watch government TV are more pessimistic. Okay, let's get to the media. Speaking of the audience of the mass media, we, based on our survey, by seeing whether the media sources comply with your understanding, with your trust, we can say that 26% of people are the audience of independent media versus 10% of those who are the audience of pro-government media. We can say that some people can be watching government TV and others can be watching independent media. So what we can look at first, the status of the economy today, question 1 to. So we can see that those who are for independent media, they say 75, and those who watch government TV, they 23 believe that it's bad. Also speaking of the question whether the income changed, you can see that there are different perceptions between these two groups of government TV watchers and non-watchers. And the question about the future changes in the country, 26% of government TV watchers believe that the situation will be bad in 25% of cases, and 65% of non-watchers. So those who watch TV, this is the conclusion, those who watch TV, government TV, they are more optimistic. And last, we tried to look at our sociologists assisted us in creating clusters like state, media, tired people, and negligent people. we can see that the figures are the same. Independent media, and those who read them, believe that everything is bad in Belarus and it's going to be worse, and those who follow pro-government media believe that everything is good, is going to be better, and 40% of the negligent ones believe that the situation will improve, and the independent ones believe that this will happen in 11% of cases. And the last thing, there is the website where we have all these charts, all this information, all these documents. We post them there. You can read all the materials on different dimensions. So please enter the website, click and read. Okay, I'm passing the floor to the next presenter. Thank you. Before we have our next presenter, we would like to answer a few questions because we had questions of the audience. Are we ready to ask them? Well, we can ask questions at the end as well. Okay, we can leave all the questions to the end of our event. And our next presenter is Lvovskiy, who is going to be speaking about expectations and sentiment of businesses, SMEs. There was a survey that was organized in August this year too. Okay, I believe that you can read me. So, if we believe what Alice has said, then we can believe that among SMEs, there are lots of people who follow government media because the sentiment, economic sentiment among firms has significantly improved versus the survey in April. So, in just a few weeks after the war started, back then everybody expected to have great shocks, and people had negative sentiment. So today shocks have either come true, or these are the people who stayed in the country and who coped with the challenges, and right now they are less pessimistic. Next slide. This is the methodology of the survey. We survey 300 small and medium-sized enterprises. We do not survey large enterprises. We look at those who are in sectors of industry, construction, trade, and all other business activities. Respondents are owners or top managers of companies. It's an online survey. Our methodology is based on the OECD methodology, which ensures comparability with the previous surveys. And the surveys organized by the IPM Research Center in 2020 and 2021. The main unit I'm going to use here is called the Bci Index. We should interpret it this way. If it equals 50, then the situation is neutral. Over 15 means it's positive. Less than 50, it means the situation is negative or depressing. As we can see, throughout the observation period, we can observe one of the most positive situations with the composite Bci Index. In December 2020, we could see a serious depression among businesses. Then it elevated, and when the war in Ukraine started, we started dropping to the negative line, and right now we're getting back to the neutral line, and the index is a little bit above 50. So we are in a neutral zone. However, previous measurements were showing negative sentiment of the present time and the negative future projections. If we look at the subgroups of the Bci Index, then in the present time, almost everybody says that the situation is slightly negative or neutral. like in the industry. Yes, and even in wholesale and retail trade. But speaking of the future, everybody is either optimistic, like in the industry, or neutral, like in all other sectors. Negative perception of the past are those who are in. Do we have awkward sound, echoing sound? This is a technical hiccup. Okay, we don't longer have it. It's okay. So out of those who have a negative perception of the past for the last 3 months, we can stand out wholesale and retail trade, which suffer from the demand depression. And this does not match the Belstat data, because Belstat, when commenting the situation in the industry and construction sector, they say that the situation there is negative. However, when talking to these industries, they do not express this depression. Now we have a current economic and financial standing of companies. Again, there was a significant drop in our survey in March and April, and right now is everything is getting back on track of neutrality. Speaking of the economic standing, in December 2020, we even had a positive perception. We are not back to the positive track, but we are leaving the negative area and we are entering the neutral perception area. And we can see that there is a permanent growth. After year 2020, we came to the neutral position and we are staying in this area. However, one of the main complaints of the top managers and owners of companies is about access to finance. Nevertheless, when they don't have access to finance, they believe that their standing is neutral, neither good nor bad. Next slide. This shows the expected economic and financial situation. Again, in both cases, versus the previous measurements, we are in the neutral zone, abandoning the negative zone. We are even a little positive about the financial situation. Next slide. This is probably the most vulnerable spot in our economy for entrepreneurs. This is the criterion of production and sales. Here we can see the largest negative perception in the present time about sales and production. It is quite depressive. However, speaking of the future, our respondents believe that everything is going to become normal. So this is not going to be a further decrease, and there will be some turning back to the routine. Our next slide shows changes in production and sales. And again, for the last 3 months, how people perceive their past. We are out of the negative perception after the war. The negative perception was almost like in 2020. Right now, we're getting back to neutrality. However, we have not managed to get to the neutrality about the perception of the last 3 months. And speaking of the future, people are neutral because our businesses are known for being of Nordic character, as we say. Now, speaking of employment, many people in Belarus know that nothing happens about unemployment in Belarus. Unemployment or employment has nothing to do with the business cycle. Companies do not try to fire anybody. beforehand, before firing them, because they know they can lower wages, they can fire people anytime, because there are no safeguards for the people because of the contractual scheme, and the people can be working in one shift instead of two, uh, uh, because there is no work and there is no systemic effort to support the unemployed. So nothing happens with employment in Belarus. Speaking of prices, expectations and perceptions of price changes are permanently high. In fact, prior to the political crisis in 2020, Belarus had very moderate inflational expectations. At that time, in 2018, 2019, the National Bank of Belarus managed to gain trust of the economic agents and managed to bring inflation to relatively low levels, internationally speaking. But after the events that started on August 9th, 2020, the National Bank lost this trust. And right now we have been having permanent high inflationary expectations both in people and in businesses. So inflationary expectations are always high, they do not change, they don't go up or down. Next slide. This is probably the most positive slide out of our survey. Here we can see that the top managers and owners of businesses were asked about risks in Belarus. Despite the fact that I, being an economist who reads government statements, I believe that risks are relatively high. Business people believe that risks go down. Today we can see an abrupt, steep decline in risk perception. Certainly it is higher than the median level, so entrepreneurs still believe that risks are relatively high, but the very degree of doing business in a risky way declines all the time. And today, this is one of the steepest declines. It looks like the entrepreneurs could see what happens when risks come, and right now they believe to better understand the developments of businesses in the future following the laws of economics. Next slide was about is about the question how entrepreneurs overcome current risks, and we can compare this with the previous survey, the cyan line, and the red line, the red bar is what is today. We can see a qualitative increase. At the beginning of the war, entrepreneurs did not take action. They were uncertain. They didn't know what to do. And right now, many entrepreneurs decided to start acting. First of all, they overcome current risks by trying to improve the performance of their businesses. They try to promote new products and services in the market. They look for new formats of businesses. They look for new export channels. And then this is followed by conservative actions and responses to the economic crisis, like firing people or selling parts of their assets, which is less popular, also converting assets into foreign currencies, etc. Our next slide is about access to finance. That's the issue that makes Belarusian businesses unhappy, as usual. Despite the National Bank has a large scale or relatively large issue of softer loans, or they create good conditions for soft loans, access to finance, according to business people, still deserves to be better. And this is in the zone of decline, according to our index. This is about 45, so this is less than 50. The situation here deteriorated after the war broke out, but it did not go worse. It even improved a bit. Next slide is about barriers faced by entrepreneurs. And here we can see significant changes between early war and August. In early war, the main barriers were like high uncertainty, macroeconomic instability, etc. And right now, the barriers that are directly related to sanctions are on the first place. Is the top one is low domestic demand. We do not see changes happening after the political crisis started. Practically all surveys speak about decreased domestic demand, and the rest of the barriers are associated with sanctions, forex fluctuations, disrupted supply chains, lacking material, difficulties with shipments, difficulties with remittances and payments. So all of those things become the topical challenges and barriers in quarters 2 and 3 of 2022. Conclusion. Yes, the last slide. In general, the situation is getting to the neutral zone. The perception of the current times and the perceptions of the future are not longer negative, they are neutral. Some problems faced by entrepreneurs are challenges caused by sanctions, by the disrupted business routines, disruption in their logistics, supply chains. Some of their business partners terminate their relations and production chains break out. Certainly, there are still difficulties about access to finance, and probably the most positive change, starting from the early war years, is that entrepreneurs feel smaller risks, or they see smaller risks. They believe that Belarus is risky, but less risky than in previous years. Thank you for your attention. I'm passing the floor to Dmitry Kruk. But before Dmitry is getting ready with his presentation, maybe we have any questions to Lev right now. Please introduce yourself and ask a question. My name is Irina Sazanovich. I have a question about the methodology on SMEs. How you surveyed them? Was it a phone call? Was it an email? It was an online survey. Okay, online survey. Were these the same businesses or different businesses in different surveys? Both. This is not a balanced panel. Part of the businesses participated in surveys before, and some of them were newcomers. Okay, thank you. Alexei Zhukov, I would like to ask you a clarifying question about businesses. Did you have an opportunity to investigate, or at least to see what part of those who participated in the previous surveys changed throughout time? Maybe they exited their business. So maybe the survey in August demonstrates or illustrates that some people became bankrupt, some of them relocated, and their place is occupied by those who took their place. Those people, those businesses who managed to adapt or who had ties to the government. Certainly, we might have some errors. We can estimate this error, but only partially. We can try connecting previous respondents, but there is a problem. There's a challenge. Maybe we will even try doing something like that, but this will require a lot of effort because these people might have different phone numbers and email addresses if they closed their businesses, exited their businesses. If they relocated, they might have different positions, etc. But in the future, we are likely to try to do something like that. But it seems to me that only dev.by portal still manages to poll people and businesses who relocated and who stayed in the country. We are not able to do that yet. Do we have any other questions in the meantime? Okay, please tell me or text me if there are any challenges. Please contact the press club. Are there any challenges about chatting? Because some people say that there are some troubles with the chat. If we have some problems of the kind, please let us know. Text us somewhere. And now I'm passing the floor to Dmitry Kruk, who will tell us about the macroeconomic situation. Thank you, Olga. Hello, everyone. I have two short disclaimers. First, when we make a presentation, and this is for the third time, I would like to say that my presentation will be different from the two previous presentations. Okay. First, our rationale of monitoring the economy of Belarus, we try to look at it from different dimensions. What Alice and Lev introduced, these were the surveys, and my part is based on the statistics. Therefore, there might be some contradictions. Like this is not what companies and people think, but these are just dry figures. And the second important thing is that this time, when we did monitoring, we had a specific challenge. I'm not going to complain. However, this is a critically important thing. Basically, all statistics has been restricted by the government, and there's a disclaimer in the most important figures in my presentation because this is based on the previous data and extrapolation of data, or we use proxies to calculate imports and exports. I'm not going to be dwelling on this, but you will see foreign trade and pricing conditions. There are only estimates, not real figures. The real situation might be a bit different. Slide 1 is a simplified landscape. This is a summary of my presentation, an attempt to bring all bricks in one place. If at the center we have the national economy, so what happened? Okay, let's look at those blue ovals first. This is what impacts and the comments. What changed in Q2? The main news for the last half year are export shocks because of sanctions. And the key idea of Q2 is that these shocks, this might seem unexpected, but this has been circulated in the press for 1.5 months. So these shocks get smaller. And based on the current data, we can expect that the export bottom, the maximum impact on exports, was in May and June. European sanctions started being full scale on June the 4th. We can see that the scope of physical exports got back on its track. Very important things happen externally. What we see beyond our attention, what happens in the global economy, this is not what I'm going to focus on, but we should keep this in mind. I believe in Q3 and Q4, this is going to be one of the key factors. But right now, we can see the changing external price competitiveness. This is a unique or a paradoxical situation when we depend on the forex rate and Russia, and we try to keep this dependence. At that, the forex rate in Russia strengthened Russian ruble to many currencies, and the National Bank of Belarus had to partially unchain itself from the Russian forex rate, and we can see the real devaluation towards the Russian ruble and other currencies, and at the same time, the domestic price growth did not adapt to international pricing. Therefore, the pricing competitiveness in external markets is unprecedented. Two more key news. In Q2, there was a significant increase of the monetary momentum. So the monetary policy was made softer, and this supports the economy probably. And why probably? Again, this is about the data, because we don't have access to the data. But indirect data proxies say that this momentum gathers pace in the economy. And in Q2, we can see that the economy goes down. It continues going down, but probably we're very close to the bottom. It's very important that we have the secondary effects, or the effects of general equilibrium, the impact of the external shock penetrated the economy, households reduced their spending, and then we can see that it brings effect. Inflation is slower. However, the inflationary landscape is not favorable. The financial stability is maintained, but it is fragile. But we do not have an evident economic crisis. I believe it is important to look at those blocks and keep them in mind altogether. And now I'm going to scroll through these highlighters. One more thing, interpretation. Both Lev and Alice touched upon this. It is very important today how we interpret the situation. My hypothesis, this is what Lev and Alice said, why this perception is very good. They both of them said that it was on the eve of a disaster, but then the disaster did not happen. So the perception is not that bad. In order to evaluate the economy, it's important to have a current understanding and for you to have the baselines. If we compare with what we could expect 5 or 6 months ago, then the situation is not that bad today. And the arguments at the bottom can be used to say that the current economic standing is quite normal. But if we look at long-term targets, what could be within the course of a normal development of the Belarusian economy, and what would happen if we had normal good institutions, then it would be absolutely different. So it depends on what you put your stakes on. Next slide. Now, please dive into the data. If we look at the dynamics of the GDP, what I said, like we continue submerging into recession, and Q2 is going to be the fastest and the deepest dive. Those of you who do not know this figure, blue bars are the quarterly growth of GDP based on the seasonally adjusted data for the previous quarter. This is like the momentum speed or immediate speed of the economy. We can see what happened in Q2. The yellow line is comparing Q2 with Q1. This figure, this yellow line, is not identical. And the red line is the average growth rate for the last 5 years. What is the conclusion? The dive in Q2 was very deep, and there are prerequisites, as I've said, to believe that this dive into recession will slow down. Next slide. If we look at the levels, usually we look at the GDP growth. However, in the context of what Alice and Lev said, it is very important to feel what is the level which is a baseline. And I believe this is an important graph to interpret self-perception of a dive into recession. This is like the economic time machine. The fall in which we are in on the right can be associated with getting back to the previous income levels. Right now, we can say that this is a fast dive into recession. It was the fastest dive in the history of Belarus. But speaking of the level, we are very far. Well, I don't know whether this is good or bad news, but we are far from what is perceived as the bottom. So we can compare the current well-being based on the GDP. We can compare it with the recession of 2015 and 16. And if we want to interpret it as a good news, we can say that we are not as deep. However, we had a peak in Q2 of 2022, and then we lost about 5.5% of the well-being. And if we look at the last month's data, this is about almost 7% of the well-being. And the current level of the well-being, if we look not at average salaries, but at GDP, this is like getting back into Q4 of 2017. This factor is important. Why? In recession, it is also important to know the baseline. We remember that we have been falling from the historical peak, and the level which is associated with the poverty of 2015 and 16, we are almost half the way to this bottom. And if we speak about the most negative scenarios that can be envisaged, then we passed only 1/3 of the way if we believe that the bottom is at about 20% of the peak of Q2 of 2022. An important thing to be stressed is that the dive deep into the recession in Q2 was mainly about domestic demand. It's critical. The sanctions and the unusual external environment make it this way that this drop in exports is compensated by domestic demand. And this is a horrible situation. But today the government believes that imports is the killer of GDP, and the short-term, in a short-term perspective, this is a simplified vision, and we can see that imports shrink as much as exports. And imports bring no negative effect to the GDP. If we believe that exports is purely external demand, then its contribution to the negative dynamics of the GDP is neglectable. And domestic demand drop is much more significant. This is about the consumption in households. I believe this is these are the things that were not operational during COVID-19, and the macro situation is similar to the COVID times, and right now it accelerates. And these things have a momentum, they have inertia. Yes, these things can be balanced, can be retracted, but these things have been activated, have been triggered. Speaking of foreign trade, this figure indicates that the export shock does not translate into direct arithmetical growth of GDP decline. It generates negative effects that are disseminated on the economy, and the GDP gets smaller. But if we break down this by the demand factors, we can see that the scope of imports and exports, these two bullets, they shrink together. And why this is unexpected and why this happens. In February and March, when I estimated the worst scenarios, the modal calculations were showing that in case of such exports decline, imports would decline, but not that critically. And imports decline, radical imports decline, can be seen as some inspiration for stabilizing the current dynamics, but this is good news for the future. But in the meantime, this stabilizes the dynamics of the GDP, and which is important, this seriously stabilizes the foreign standing, which is presented as a huge achievement of the economic authorities. So the government is saying that external trade is shrinking both in terms of exports and imports, and they interpret this as a huge success. The next slide will show us a blue point and a green triangular are the indices of prices. So we can see that there is a very significant price advantage. Our exports prices feel much better than the import prices, and this is one of the key explanations. Next slide. You can see this. Okay. Next one. No, let's get back. I'm going to be dwelling on prices later. Okay, a few words about the physical volumes. This is the average data for Q2. Getting back to my thesis, my idea that the main spot of the greatest shock is already in the past. Until April inclusive, we see the data by Belstat. This is based on the facts. And then I believe that the figures, these estimates, my projections, my estimates, I believe are close to reality. These are the physical volumes of exports and imports. This is the negative thing caused by sanctions. And my idea is that in April and May, we touched the bottom and we can see a slight improvement. Whether this improvement is sustainable is questionable. And I'm not speaking about full-scale recovery. So let's say 100 is the level of 2018, that we can see that we dropped for 1/3, and this has compensated. I believe that this is because of partial recovery of oil products. I do not have clear evidence. I don't have proofs, but there are proxies in the government data indicating that this partial recovery is due to some recovery of oil product exports. Next slide. I have already explained all those things. The external, the foreign position, which enables to ensure financial stability, is first of all the consequence of blocking the pricing shock and an increased price compatibility. Blue is the index of pricing competitiveness. And this is calculated as the indicator of the real effective exchange rate and the versus rate in trade. If we take regression, and if we try to use this to explain foreign trade, this is significant to explain foreign trade. In plain words, the blue indicator, we call it a proxy of pricing competitiveness, is very important to whether Belarusian producers can compete with the foreign ones in prices. And right now, we can see an explosion of price competitiveness. It happened 2 times in history. This is either Q3 and Q4 of 2011 or quarters 1, 2 of 2012. Right now, we are in a very comfortable situation in terms of price competitiveness. Again, this has been achieved in a paradoxical way, non-standard way. On the one hand, what I said about the specificity of managing the exchange, foreign exchange rate, and freezing the effect of pricings growing around the world, and freezing domestic prices, and second, reducing or holding the import prices through the Russian support. And the two main components why import prices grow not that much and what enables to hold down domestic prices, this is what creates this advantage for pricing, and also pricing for oil and gas. We remember that Belarusian pricing for gas and oil is very low. Today, Belarus has unchanged pricing, and in Europe, gas and oil prices are much higher. This is a competitive advantage in prices. And I believe that similar things happen about oil pricing. Indirect data that we can squeeze out of the remaining disclosed statistics gives me grounds to believe that in May and June, oil from Russia was sold at a discount price. I don't have evidence and proof, but this is what should be the main reason. And also, Belarus exports its produce internationally at international prices and markets at international prices. And second, Belarus holds prices in the domestic prices low. Therefore, this generates this huge competitive pricing advantage. The last two things. The reverse side of the coin is that despite the fixed domestic prices that are kept low, still we can see that the export shock has started penetrating domestically. And right now, the driver of shrinkage is the domestic demand, and it started shrinking because the opportunity is to support salaries at a low, at a low level, expired, and we can see that salaries, wages get lower, and the wages do not grow if compared to GDP. But why people do not see significant changes? This is because the salaries used to be very high, but on the other hand, this real wage does not launch the secondary effects. And what is also important, I would like to say what is important today in the situation with salaries. This will predetermine the situation in the future. The red line that goes up and down, these are labor expenditures, are real and efficient ones. This is a gap between the current wages and performance. So we can say that that salaries are higher than the performance, and the burden of excessive salaries is on the shoulders of enterprises. Even today's salaries, even considering that they are lower today, this lowering will not compensate the worsened market situation for the enterprises. So this is the burden for the state-owned enterprises, first of all. This might be a rational tool if we believe that the economy will recover from shock tomorrow, but if it doesn't, then the price competitiveness of enterprises will evaporate. Right now, this can be used, and the idea is to narrow these effects of the second echelon, this second line of defects, and enterprises accumulated some competitiveness and financial pillow in previous years, but there are prerequisites for salaries to continue going down. The export shock was stopped. It was supposed to stabilize the economy, but if salaries go down, and they are likely to go down, this will be a counter factor. Inability to manage your wages and balancing with the performance once limited. This will launch another trend. Declining employment accelerated, and we can see that we can see the entire record in the number of newly created jobs. Let's look at real figures. 10 years ago, the average number of new jobs per quarter was 15 to 16,000, and today we speak about 3 to 4,000. Why this indicator is so important? This indicator is seen as one of the key indicators of the economy dynamism. If companies create jobs, this means that companies really believe in the future, that their expectations are proved instrumentally, so to say. And if we see shrinking jobs, we can see that the labor market is not free, and second, the expectations are not as good as they say. So probably subconsciously, people believe that there are risks. Let's skip this slide. The last idea is about the excessively soft monetary policy. I would like to inform you that we are launching 2 more bulletins on the economy starting this month. So our colleagues who are responsible for these bulletins believe that these are very important bulletins. They are on the monetary policies. This is taken from the expert review on the monetary policy. Those of you interested in the monetary policy, and especially those who are interested in the technical details, those who are ready to study the monetary policy issues, then please look at them. If we simplify this figure, we can say that if we're in the negative side, the monetary policy is softer than what it would be optimum for the economy in the context of the economy, which is in the core of this estimate. But this is a very adequate model. So this is a manifestation that today the support of the issue of cash, of Belarusian ruble, and supporting the economy is economy of enterprises is more important than the inflation rate. So prices have been sacrificed. We can always say that this is bad or wrong, but we should find an equilibrium. So we need an equilibrium. And today the monetary policy is excessively soft. And this means that there is the threat of developing recession. And this slide illustrates this as the inflationary bang that we had in Q1 was stopped, but I'm not going to dive deep into this. Please study the Monetary Policy Bulletin. We explain these things and we provide additional indicators as proofs. Our prerequisites for price changes changed, but they are different. Today, this is not about the export and logistics chains, but about matching Belarusian prices with the prices in Russia. So our increased price competitiveness has another side of the coin. Adaptation of prices and excessively soft monetary policy, despite the fact that this should slow down the inflation, and we can say that in Q2 this was effective, but in the future we cannot say, we do not have prerequisites that the inflation will not be high. Excessively soft monetary policy and disparity in pricing between Belarus and Russia, this what will drive prices up. In the end, I'm going to reiterate the main things are contradictions and uncertainties. Yes, there are signs of GDP stabilization, but as I explained, there are lots of factors. We can say that we are on the brink of breaking, and the situation might change promptly. All the four characteristics that are important for our crisis can change rapidly. Yes, in 2022, the pathway that we are in will persist, but if we speak about 2023 and further, in relation to whether we reached the bottom and how long the recession is going to be, we do not have clear indications. We do not see promising tracks. And the last slide, I'm not going to mention every bullet point. This is actually a duplicate of the first page of my presentation. What are the main factors of uncertainties? The financial standing of state-owned enterprises. I've said that many things are a burden for them, like higher salaries. This is the burden for state-owned enterprises. But what is their financial standing? We don't know, starting from Q2, because the statistics has been closed, not disclosed since then. So we don't know whether they have any safety cushion or not. We don't know. So these factors will predetermine whether the situation will deepen the inflation, will launch the spiral of the financial crisis or not. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. I urge the audience to ask questions. Okay, right now, we know that people were not able to ask questions in the chat. Can we now? Yes, we can do it now. Please use the Q&A button. I'm going to read them out loud. We have questions in the room. I can see at least 3 people who would like to ask questions. And I'm coming to you. Hello. Alexey Alexandrovich from APN news agency from Pozdrav. You, Andrei. I remember, Dmitry, you used to have 5 scenarios of economic development. And what is the scenario that Belarus is taking now? And second, what about projections? if the government demands that by the year end we should get to zero, not to be below zero, whether this is possible. Thank you, Alexei. Answering your first question, if you remember, we are following the trajectory of a slow dive into the recession. So that's not the worst case scenario, but we are in the middle between the worst and the best case scenario. Speaking of whether we can reach zero this year, not to go below zero, it's impossible to say. Hypothetically speaking, this is possible, but the probability is very low, because if we take very stupid projections, I don't think that we can be better than -4% GDP decline. So I say that the GDP decline will be 6%. That's my main projection. So for zero to happen, sanctions have to be removed or some other miracle. Okay, speaking of optimism, what if Russia gives us some $8 billion? Then by the year end, we will be able to get to zero. Okay, do you hear me? Okay. Dmitry, look, at the beginning, you were speaking about global economy, but then you did not mention it in the end. How this is going to impact us, and what are the projections, in your opinion? The prospects are not very good. What is the main issue or dilemma today? The traditional dilemma between the output and inflation. This year we have the record-breaking inflation, and all central banks say that this chicken hawk strategy. If we look at Eurostat, we can see that there is a consensus between market players, and this is the best projection for the futures. So monetary policies will get tighter, and there is no doubt about it. And we believe that this will continue until March next year. And we could not see such rates before. But this slows down the growth practically everywhere. And today in the US, EU, and other countries, they are saying that combating inflation, the combination of COVID-19 and the war, and the combating inflation can be the catalyst of recession. And I believe that the probability of such events is very high. What is going to be the impact on Belarus? There will be a bad impact on Belarus, undoubtedly. We can look at the various channels. For example, we can see that the logistics is the thing that can be neglected. It is possible to pay for the logistics and to sell things in the far countries. And if pricing advantage disappears, then it will be very difficult to do. Next, if in addition to sanctions there are shrinking prices for oil, and this is likely to happen, quite likely to happen, because of the recession. And in Russia, recession is much less than expected. And then these are the main factors of how global recession is going to impact us. These are the key things that I would like to highlight, but there are certainly others. I have a few questions. Okay, I have a question to one of you. In your very interesting report statement, the very interesting word, the most frequently word used was recession and then adaptation. Both things are about the economy. Dmitry, you have one conclusion like recession, and you, Lev, have normal adaptation of business people towards the situation. So maybe you can benchmark this. And a question also to the first presenter. Look, if I look at the mass media, how did you measure those people who watch government TV and so many optimists or pessimists, or you calculate it vice versa? So many optimists and so many government TV watchers. What's the methodology? And if we have time, please answer the question about the cluster analysis, factor analysis, and other grouping. Maybe you can tell us how you did it technically. Thank you. Answering your first question, I believe that Alice's presentation clearly indicates that there is a gap between reality and perception. The Belarusian economy is in recession. We comply with the definition of recession. We have been falling down for 6 months, and this dropping does not stop. Every month we have a higher drop than in the previous month. There's an expectation that a drop in August is not going to be as high as in June and July versus 2021, but we have to wait for one more week to get the August figures. At the same time, the perception of people has various psychological effects, etc. Probably people believe that the war would bring horrible things. The most horrible things did not happen. Therefore, both people and businesses have expectations that are neutral. Two more words on top. I fully agree with Lev. Look, that is why we look from both sides, statistics, model estimates, and surveys. I do not see any big problem when expectations or perceptions contradict the objective statistics. This is diagnostics, and Lev provided his explanations of why this happened. And following this issue of contradiction, if we combine all the presentations heard, then we can say that this is adaptation to recession. Well, probably you have the same scheme like in case of Alisa, like objective and subjective. Our participants in Zoom cannot hear you. You need a microphone, but not for a long time. It looks like you have a. It looks like you have the same ratios among economists between the objective economic data and the perceptions of businesses. They are opposite, and Alice has objective economic data on GDP and the subjective perception of the economic situation. There are also these are also opposite things. So the people who are in the economics have this contradiction, and at the macro societal level, people, the entire society, and this economic situation have different figures. Since Alice is a positive and happy person, this might be seen there. So people believe that the situation is less negative, but in all groups, there are also quite a lot of people who have negative perception. So the positive trends are seen in people and in businesses, but the perception of people is negative and businesses have neutral perception. Businesses have or see less problems in the economy. There can also be another hypothesis. I would suggest that both businesses and people, maybe to a small extent, have changed the baseline of normality. So the things that they believe normal are actually worse than before. And if they compare, and when they start comparing, they believe that maybe it's not that bad. I'm sorry, we do not have time for a discussion, but let me answer the question. Also, just like a hypothesis, as I understand, Dmitry has data for Q2, and we are rushing forward. And some of the Dmitry's indicators were like steep decline in Q1, and then it got up. So this could also affect the data of me and Liv, the data that cannot be seen in macroeconomic figures. I ask these questions because I have different perceptions. And second, the name of my presentation, Why Belarusians Feel Good, certainly it's a provocative title of the presentation to show that Belarusians are very positive today if compared to previous years. In December, everybody believed that it would be a disaster and there were no sanctions, no war. I also have questions from Zoom. We should not neglect these people. And colleagues, please check whether we have any more questions. Soknerovich texts his question was answered, and all questions are in the same domain. His question is certainly there's a question about the gap. GDP drop in sectors is significantly more than 5.2, and a relatively positive perception by entrepreneurs. And another question from anonymous participant is, how do you explain the positive perception in businesses and households? I would say that the most negative things are seen in the enterprises subjected to sanctions and at state-owned enterprises. In April and May, there was a significant drop in exports of oil products and potash, but both oil and potash are businesses of large state-owned enterprises. Certainly some small and medium enterprises, including the private ones, are related to them. They live in the same cities, but the most negative things probably hit those who are subjected to sanctions, I mean companies, and others were under indirect sanctions. But for the woodworking, where there are lots of small and medium enterprises, therefore there is a difference. If the people's survey is about urban residents, and as for the businesses, this is not a representative sample for whole Belarus. Do we have any more questions? I do not see any more questions in YouTube or Zoom. If we don't have any questions, then let's wait for 20 more seconds, and then we will close this session. And then we will start discussing. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. We appreciate our partners, Press Club, our Polish friends from Senair. This is SIDA, the Swedish agency, and also